That shelter out by the creek, it's been there since before the logging company.
But it ain't just humans been using it lately.
Hold on to the rope! It's breaking!
Would you dare believe there's a creature nearly 3 meters tall, living hidden deep in the jungle, silently observing humans, not to hunt, but to save lives? What if I told you it saved my life? I'm Daniel Whitmore. I've been a forest ranger near the Cabinet Mountains of Montana for over 20 years. I don't believe in myths. I believe in maps, logic, and survival. My father died rescuing a stranger from an avalanche. Since then, I've lived by one rule. Trust what you can see, not stories in the dark. Until the spring of 1989, when something changed, the forest fell silent. No birds, no wind. Massive tracks that vanished overnight, like something didn't want to be found. Then, a freak snowstorm hit, sudden, violent. I should have died. Instead, I found an underground shelter, warm and prepared. But I wasn't alone. In the firelight, it stood there, towering, covered in thick brown fur, amber eyes glowing in the dark. Bigfoot. It didn't roar. It didn't attack. It quietly added wood to the fire, then sat across from me, distant, respectful, almost human. For 3 days, we shared that space. A man who trusted only logic, and a legend who offered me warmth, safety, and something even rarer, silence that understood pain. Before it left, it gave me a walking stick, shaped to fit my hand, and there I saw marks that hinted it had once saved someone else, maybe even my father. That winter rewrote everything I knew about the forest, and about what we call monsters. Now, I've kept this story to myself for decades, but I think it's time. So tell me, where are you watching from? What's your name, friend? Because stories like this, they don't belong to just one person. They deserve to travel, to grow, to reach those who still believe, or want to believe, that there's kindness hiding in the wild. If this touched something in you, help me build a community of those who care. Leave a like, subscribe, and let's keep the fire alive for the watchers of the woods and those who believe they still exist, sending warmth wherever you are. Daniel Whitmore rose before the sun did, not with an alarm clock, not with any rush. Just the kind of quiet habit that seeps into a man after 26 years living on the edge of something too big to tame. He folded his blanket, tugged on his wool socks, and reached for the same green thermos he always did. Scratched, dented, but it still held heat like it respected the work he did. The ranger station creaked with the chill of a Montana spring morning. Not cold enough to bite, but cold enough to warn. Outside, the pine-tinted air was damp with snowmelt, and the light that filtered through the clouds felt more silver than gold. Daniel scanned the logbook, eyes pausing on the time-stamped notes. Nothing unusual, no flagged calls, no trouble. Still, his gut told him today wasn't going to be ordinary. He stepped outside, boots crunching on frost-tipped needles. Luke Merritt was already by the truck, backpack slung, trying not to look like he was freezing. 17 and hungry to be useful. He gave Daniel a nod, respectful but not stiff. Daniel nodded back. No words needed. They drove in silence, past the narrow switchbacks and over wooden bridges that groaned like old bones. Libby was far behind now, swallowed by forest and fog. Daniel guided the old truck toward an old meteorological outpost tucked halfway up what the locals called Mule Ridge. Not many used it anymore. Too remote, too tedious. But Daniel trusted data more than weather reports. And data didn't lie. They parked at a rust-bitten trailhead, where the dirt gave way to rock and memories. The two of them started the climb, boots gripping slats of wood softened by decades of snow and rot. Luke tried to make conversation about baseball. Daniel gave a grunt. His eyes stayed forward. Every bend, every branch, every silence mattered. That's how you kept breathing out here. The air changed about halfway up. No birds, no squirrel chatter, not even the rustle of undergrowth. Just wind whispering low through the needles, like it was holding its breath. Luke slowed, looked up. Shouldn't we be hearing more? Daniel kept walking. Sometimes the forest goes quiet. Luke frowned but didn't press. At the station, the tower loomed above them like a forgotten watchman. The equipment was mostly intact. Weather vane, anemometer, sensor panels. But Daniel's eyes narrowed on the wind gauge. Off kilter. Not broken, turned. Like someone had spun it deliberately, just enough to skew data. He climbed the short ladder, checked the base. No storm damage, no rust failure, just interference. Human or not, he couldn't say. Coming back down, his boot landed near a patch of soft mud just off the gravel path. He paused. Something had stepped here, but the shape wasn't clear, as if the upper layers had been brushed, half erased. Not like a dog, not like boots. Bigger, wider, deliberate. Someone, or something, didn't want to be tracked. Luke crouched beside him. That looks... Could be elk, Daniel cut in. But he didn't believe it. Luke straightened, squinting at a nearby tree. What about that? Daniel followed his gaze. A tree trunk, thick and unassuming, stood about 20 feet away. Etched into the bark, maybe 7 feet up, was a trio of long vertical scrapes. Not wild, not jagged, clean, measured, parallel. Too clean for a bear, too high for any man without a ladder. Neither of them spoke. On the way back, the silence returned, this time heavier, more aware. Even the wind had lowered its voice. They were less than a mile from the truck when the dogs started barking. Up the ridge, Wade Haskins stood beneath a cluster of firs, rifle slung across his back, his buddies fanning out behind him. The kind of men who dressed like they belonged out here but talked like they owned it. Their dogs barked at everything and nothing, tails stiff, noses twitching. Wade gave Daniel a half smile, all teeth and no kindness. "Morning, Ranger," he drawled. "You see anything big up that way?" Daniel didn't blink. "You're off season," Wade chuckled. "Snow's melting early. Thought we'd stretch the dogs. You know how it is." One of his men nudged the other, whispered something. Daniel didn't ask. He didn't have to. Luke shifted beside him, uncomfortable. Daniel kept his eyes on Wade. There's nothing up there but wind. Wade's smile didn't fade. "We'll see about that." They passed without incident. But Daniel's shoulders didn't loosen until the barking faded into the trees. Back at the station, Daniel didn't speak. He just made a cup of black coffee and stared out at the ridgeline. The Cabinet Mountains loomed beyond, sharp and cold, their peaks kissed by the last of winter's breath. Luke eventually broke the silence. "That wasn't elk." Daniel didn't answer. That night, the station felt too quiet, even for him. The logbook lay open, the same way it always had. But his eyes kept drifting to the window. Clouds rolled in low over the trees. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, then went silent mid-howl. Later, after Luke had gone to bed and the radio static settled into soft white hiss, Daniel stopped by the old diner off Route 37. Just one light inside. Just one person awake. Martha Bell stood behind the counter, pouring fresh coffee into a chipped porcelain mug. She didn't ask why he was there. She never did. He took a seat. She slid the mug over. "You ever seen a storm roll in with no wind?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "You ever seen the forest hold its breath like it's listening for something?" He didn't respond. She wiped the counter with a cloth, slow and careful. "There's a place up there," she said, almost too softly. "A shelter. Used to be for trappers, old miners, folks caught in whiteouts." Daniel nodded. He knew the story. Everyone local did. "But it wasn't just for them," she added, voice dipping lower. "They didn't build it alone, and they weren't the only ones who found it." Daniel stared at his coffee. Martha didn't smile. "Some places know when a life needs saving. Don't care if it's man or not. He didn't ask what she meant. He wasn't sure he wanted to. As he walked back to his truck, the wind had picked up again. Not loud, just steady, like it was remembering how to breathe. Behind him, the diner light flickered once, then settled. Up on the ridge, somewhere beneath stars no man had named, something moved. Not quickly, not fearfully. Just there, watching, waiting. And somewhere in Daniel's chest, just behind the wall he'd built for 26 years, a faint sound echoed, like wood scraping against stone, a door maybe, or a memory trying to find its way back. He didn't dream often, and when he did, it was never something worth remembering. But that night, the wind had a different plan. It howled low through the siding of the ranger cabin, slipped in past the edges of the window frame, and stirred something loose in the corners of Daniel Whitmore's memory. He woke in silence. No gasp, no sweat, just a jolt, a presence, a flicker of something old. He lay still for a few minutes, listening to the hum of the propane heater and the creak of the beams above. Then he swung his legs over the side of the cot and stared across the dim room. There, against the back wall, leaned the cane. It wasn't his. It had belonged to a man built of stone and scars, with calloused hands and boots heavier than words. His father's cane, hickory shaft, iron-banded tip, burn marked near the curve from a lightning-split pine years ago. It had sat there untouched since the day Daniel brought it down from the attic. Not to remember, but to remind. A man saves no one with sentiment. He saves with rules. That's what his father always said. But now the cane was just there, quiet, and it made the room feel smaller. By sunrise, the storm had passed, and the sky glowed pale above the treetops. Luke was late, but Daniel didn't rush him. They had the morning's fire watch, and the weather wasn't giving them trouble yet. He poured coffee, black, no sugar, and drank it standing by the window. Luke finally walked in with his usual burst of apology and half-zipped jacket. "Sorry, sir. The road out of town." Daniel just handed him the clipboard. "No damage reports?" Luke asked. "Nothing that held." They rode out just past the south loop and stopped at a bluff overlooking the valley. Clouds drifted slow across the peaks, the kind that carried no threat, but still knew how to make a man feel small. Luke leaned on the hood, munching from a crumpled granola bar. "Hey, that shelter you mentioned once. The one old miners used up in the ridge. Still there?" Daniel didn't look at him. "That was years ago." "But still, people used it, right? I mean, in real storms?" Daniel shut the hood. "Storms don't wait for stories." They didn't talk after that. Later, while Luke helped prep supplies back at the shed, Daniel walked to the far side of the ranger station where the old storage room sat locked behind a rusted bolt. It smelled like time had settled in. Dust, paper, oil-stained floorboards. He moved past coils of rope and old survey flags until he found the cabinet marked Archive. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Just that something inside him had started itching ever since the forest went silent that day. Not a fear. More like a memory being stirred with a stick. Inside the cabinet, he found logbooks, patrol records, weather charts older than Luke. He sifted, scanning pages, lifting each folder like it might suddenly burn him. Halfway through a binder marked 1969-1975, he paused. There it was, a page torn clean out. Just the jagged remnant of a heading. Incident, Mule Ridge Sector, unauthorized shelter access. Suspected large occupant. No signature, no report date, no follow-up. Gone, like it had never been written. Daniel stared at the tear for a long time. Then, without knowing why, he closed the binder, walked outside, and burned the page remnant in the fire drum. He watched the ash rise and scatter. But he didn't walk away. Not yet. He waited for the wind to carry it somewhere he couldn't follow. And then he bent down, reached into the drum, and pocketed the last piece that didn't burn. A blackened corner. No words. Just char. That evening he stopped by the diner again. Martha was closing up. Only one table left to wipe down. When he walked in, she didn't greet him with words. Just poured the coffee and set the cup on the bar like it had been waiting for him. He sipped in silence. She worked in silence. Finally, without lifting her eyes, she said, "You're not sleeping." He didn't answer. She reached into her apron, pulled out a folded square of yellowing paper, and set it beside his cup. "My grandmother used to keep this behind the register. Story from the old days. 1918, I think. Right after the winter where 2 kids vanished up north." Daniel unfolded it. A newspaper clipping, edges soft as dried leaves. No headline, just an interview. A woman, young at the time, claiming she survived a blizzard because she found a dugout shelter in the woods. Said it had firewood, said it had food. Said when she left, she looked back, and there weren't any boot prints behind her. She was 9 years old, Martha said. Swore someone was watching her from the trees. Said she felt safer there than she ever had at home. Daniel traced the faded ink with his thumb. "Why are you showing me this?" Martha shrugged. "People forget, but the mountain doesn't. It keeps things, buries them when it has to, brings them back when it's time." He folded the paper again, slower this time, and handed it back. She didn't take it. "You keep it," she said. On the drive home, the stars were out. Clear sky. No tricks. Just the long spine of the cabinets rising in the distance like the back of some ancient beast curled beneath the snow. He pulled over once, halfway down the old logging road, and cut the engine. Just sat. The air was still. Somewhere out there the forest was waiting, watching, not hostile, not inviting, just aware. The next day, Wade Haskins came into the diner. Same boots, same jacket, same smug lean against the counter like he owned the world. "Morning, Martha," he said too loudly. "Heard some things up the ridge, real strange stuff. Got a buddy says he caught a shape on trail cam, big, standing up. You know, 2 legs, kinda tall." Martha didn't blink, just kept slicing lemon pie like she was handling evidence. Daniel, from the back booth, set his fork down. Wade looked over. "Hey, Ranger, you been up that way, haven't you?" Daniel met his gaze. "Plenty of shapes in the woods." Wade smiled thin. "Sure, but some worth more than others." He left not long after, but his words hung in the room like smoke. Later, Luke found Daniel by the woodpile. "Did you hear what Wade's been saying?" Daniel chopped a log clean through. "He talks. He's got people listening now. Says he's gonna head up next week. Bring gear, drones, scopes." Daniel paused. "Drones won't fly well in that tree line," he muttered. Luke tilted his head. "You think he'll find it?" "There's nothing to find." Luke didn't buy it, but he didn't argue either. That night, Daniel sat by the fire, holding his father's cane. The iron tip tapped soft against the floor, a rhythm without melody. In his lap sat a torn scrap from a forgotten report and an old newspaper clipping about a girl who survived without leaving footprints. The air shifted. Somewhere behind his ribs, a door creaked open, and deep inside that space, the mountain whispered a name he hadn't heard in years. Not the forest, not the legend, just the feeling that something old had noticed him back. And it wouldn't be silent much longer. The clouds didn't look like a warning. Not at first. They drifted slow across the Cabinet Mountains, soft-edged and gray, carrying that dull early autumn weight that never quite promised rain but never ruled it out either. Daniel Whitmore had seen every kind of sky Montana could throw at a man. He'd learned to trust the silence more than the shape. What you saw didn't matter as much as what you didn't hear. That morning he left Luke behind at the station, saying he'd be back before sundown. Just a standard equipment check at the Mule Ridge outpost. No alarms, no calls. He packed light. 1 thermos of coffee, 2 ration bars, a fresh coil of rope, and the map he no longer needed but still carried. Out of discipline. Out of habit. He moved like he always did. Steady, prepared, eyes scanning for rot or weakness in the trail. The kind of movement a man built from rules lives by, as if each step were part of a promise made long ago, and the forest was always listening. 3 miles in, he felt it shift. Not the air, the pressure. The ridge trail narrowed into a shelf of packed dirt between jagged rock and steep drop. Pines clung to the slope above him like claws. Their branches barely moved. The wind had vanished. Then the bird stopped. Not slowly, not with some warning flight into the canopy. Just silence, hard and clean. Like a lid had been shut over the world. Daniel paused. The trees didn't breathe. The ground held still. He glanced toward the ridge. Clouds were thickening, faster than they should. Too dark for the time of day. Too low for the altitude. Something was wrong. He pressed forward. Each step landed a little heavier than the last. By the time he reached the outpost, an old steel box of bolts and antennas fastened to the granite. His skin was cold. Not from wind. Not from shade. From instinct. He checked the readouts. The barometer was dropping fast. Numbers tumbling like a bad memory. Temperature falling. Wind speed sensors spinning unevenly. His fingers moved over the dials, calibrating. A low sound, almost below hearing, rolled through the valley. Like thunder, but longer, slower, as if the mountain was groaning in its sleep. Then the wind came back. Not a breeze, a shove. Daniel stumbled as it slammed against his back. Snow followed, hard and wrong, pelting flakes as sharp as sand. He looked up. The sky was gone, only white. He cursed once under his breath, pulled his hood up, and looped the rope around his waist. He tied the other end around the base of the station's support beam and tested it twice. Visibility had dropped to nothing, a whiteout. He'd read stories, trained for them, led recoveries after lesser ones. But this wasn't a warning system failure. This storm wasn't on any radar. It hadn't been born in the Pacific or funneled down through Idaho. It had come from nowhere. Called, not formed. He started moving, using the rope to guide him back toward the trail. The cold was burning now, creeping into his gloves, biting past his collar. He counted steps in his head. 15, 23, 38. The rope went slack. He reached behind him. Gone. Snapped clean. He was on his own. Snow blew sideways in angry sheets. No ground, no sky, just white. Each breath scraped his lungs raw. His boots sank deeper with every step, the slope trickier now. Disoriented. He tried to backtrack, but the wind erased his footprints in seconds. Then the earth gave out beneath him. Not far, maybe 6 feet, but enough. His legs dropped into a drift, knees slamming against ice-packed stone. One hand caught the edge of a buried root, the other clawed for something solid. His glove brushed wood. He froze. Wood. Not bark, not natural. Smooth, shaped. He dug, half panicked, fingers trembling as he scraped snow from what looked like boards. He pounded once. Hollow. His heart punched hard in his chest. He shoved, cursed, kicked. One more strike with his boot, and the top edge splintered inward. A door. A hidden one. He fell forward, half crawling, pulled by something older than fear. Warmth touched his face. Not heat, not fire, but warmth. As if the air inside had been holding a heartbeat for years and had just now decided to share it. He collapsed inside, the hatch slamming shut behind him under its own weight. Darkness, then his breath. He lay there, cheek pressed to cold wood, heart thrashing. It took him nearly 2 minutes to pull off his gloves, longer to peel back his hood. Snow still clung to his lashes. He blinked. Shapes began to form. Low ceiling, curved. Walls packed clay, reinforced with logs. The smell of earth and cedar. Dust. A faint trace of smoke, long faded. He sat up. His joints screamed, but he was alive. Somehow, buried in the gut of the Cabinet Mountains, he'd been pulled back from the edge. Not by plan, not by map, by something else. He reached into his coat and pulled the small magnesium lighter he always carried. It sparked after 2 tries. A thin flame danced. In that glow, the room revealed itself. Stone hearth, blackened but intact. A few broken stumps of candles near the far wall. Piles of dry bark, kindling. Someone had thought ahead. Daniel stood, legs shaky, and moved to the hearth. He worked quickly, hands remembering what the body forgot. Within minutes, he had a flame catching. The smell of pine and ash rose like breath from a mouth long sealed shut. And in that flickering light, above the stones of the back wall, he saw it. Scratches. High. Not wild, not random, vertical, deliberate. Too high for a man, too clean for a bear. 3 marks. Faint but wide, etched into the packed clay like someone had pressed fingers the size of a man's palm into the earth. He stared at them. Then he sat down. The fire cracked. His breath slowed. The storm screamed above. But inside the shelter, all was still. He didn't wonder who'd built it. He wondered who'd remembered to leave it ready. And why. His father had always said you make peace with a mountain by learning its laws, not by asking favors. But tonight Daniel had broken a rule, and the mountain had spared him anyway, somewhere in the back of his mind. A single sentence stirred like a ghost coming in from the cold. Only discipline saves lives. He wasn't sure it still held. The fire popped. The scratches on the wall caught the light, and in the silence that followed, the air shifted. Not from wind, not from snow, but from the weight of something old, waiting just outside the edge of understanding. Daniel closed his eyes. He wasn't alone down there, but for the first time in days, he didn't feel afraid. Just watched, held, as if the mountain had opened its ribs for a moment and let him rest beneath the bone, and the storm roared on. The fire did not roar. It never did. It breathed, low and steady, as if it understood the difference between warmth and greed. Daniel Whitmore sat on the packed earth floor with his back against the curved wall, boots steaming softly as the heat worked its way back into his bones. Outside, the storm still screamed, a long animal sound scraping across the mountain's spine, but down here the noise arrived dulled, broken, as though the shelter itself decided what was allowed to enter. Daniel checked himself the way he had been trained to do since he was young. Fingers first. He flexed them slowly, counting the pain, watching the color return. Then toes, ankles, knees. He pressed his palm against his thigh, then his chest, feeling for anything that shouldn't be there. No fractures, no blood. Just cold that had gone too deep and was now reluctantly letting go. He leaned forward and fed another piece of bark into the fire. It caught quickly, too quickly, dry, well chosen. Someone had stacked this wood with care, the way a person does when they expect to come back. That thought settled uneasily in his chest. The shelter revealed itself little by little as his eyes adjusted. The ceiling arched overhead, no more than 7 feet at its highest point, formed from heavy beams fitted into the clay like ribs. The walls were smooth where hands had pressed them flat long ago, reinforced with timber that had darkened with age but not weakened. The floor sloped ever so slightly toward a shallow trench along the far side, a drainage channel cut with intention, guiding meltwater away instead of letting it pool. This wasn't a hole dug in panic. This was a place designed to last. Daniel stood carefully and paced the space, counting steps. 12 from wall to wall. Enough room for several bodies if they kept still. Enough air, too. He looked up toward the ceiling and followed the line of soot stains to a narrow stone chimney that disappeared into darkness. Ingenious. Narrow enough to hide heat signature, angled just enough to prevent backdraft. Someone knew storms. Someone knew mountains. The fire crackled softly, and with each pop the shelter seemed to wake a little more, like it had been waiting for company. Daniel found a flat stone set near the hearth and sat again, his breath finally slowing to something human. He took a sip from his thermos. The coffee was lukewarm now, bitter, but it grounded him. Rules, he reminded himself. Inventory, observation. Don't let curiosity get ahead of survival. Still, his eyes kept returning to the scratches on the wall. They were faint, old, nearly blended back into the clay, but once seen, they refused to disappear. 3 long marks, pressed in rather than cut, their edges rounded by time. Not violent, not careless, almost respectful, like a signature left by someone who didn't need to explain themselves. Daniel swallowed and looked away. He moved to the far side of the shelter and noticed something he hadn't before. A shadow that didn't belong to the fire. A narrow gap between the back wall and a slab of stone that looked wrong, not part of the original curve. Set there later, he crouched and ran his fingers along it. Cold, smooth. Stone laid against stone with patience. He pressed. The slab shifted, just a fraction of an inch, enough to release a breath of colder air from behind it. The smell changed, too. Damp, mineral, like a creek bed sealed away. A second way in, or out. Daniel didn't open it all the way. He didn't need to. The logic of it settled quickly. Too quickly. A larger body wouldn't fit through the main hatch easily, not without leaving clear signs above. This narrow passage, hidden behind stone and shadow, allowed someone or something to come and go without breaking the surface, without leaving tracks where men would see them. The shelter was not just neutral, it was shared. Daniel sat back on his heels and let the realization pass through him without chasing it. This was not the time for conclusions, only for staying alive. He returned to the fire and noticed a small pile of split logs stacked neatly near the hearth. Not many, enough for a night, maybe two. He picked one up, weighed it in his hands. Recently cut. The resin smell was still there if you looked for it. Someone had been here not long ago. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with the strange awareness that he was a guest in a place that had rules older than his own. Without fully understanding why, he reached into his pack and pulled out a scrap of paper and a pencil stub. He hesitated, then wrote slowly, carefully, so the letters wouldn't shake. If you use this place, leave wood. Keep it ready. He folded the note and wedged it into a crack in the stone near the hearth where it wouldn't burn. It felt foolish. It felt necessary, like knocking before entering a room you didn't own. When he finally lay down, the fire was low but steady. He wrapped himself in his jacket, hat pulled down, boots propped near the heat. The storm above pressed harder, snow thudding against the earth overhead like fists, but the shelter held. The walls didn't shudder. The ceiling didn't groan. For the first time since the whiteout hit, Daniel let his eyes close. Sleep came in pieces. Short stretches of dark broken by awareness. The sound of fire shifting. The distant thunder of snow moving somewhere far above. His father's voice drifting up from memory, not clear enough to make out words, only the tone. Calm. Certain. At some point the temperature changed. Not colder, different. The fire guttered suddenly, its flame bending sideways as if something had drawn the air away from it. Fine ash lifted and drifted toward the ceiling. Daniel's eyes snapped open. The chimney. Snow was falling down it. Not a collapse, not a draft. Blocked. Something had covered the opening above. Daniel pushed himself up slowly, heart hammering now, every sense awake. He reached for the bear spray at his belt, fingers tightening around the canister. He didn't raise it. Not yet. A shadow moved across the far wall. Not fast, not aggressive, just present. The fire dimmed as the oxygen thinned, and in that half-light the scratches on the clay seemed deeper, darker, like they had just been made. Daniel's breath sounded too loud in his ears. He forced it down, measured, the way he had taught Luke. Whatever was here had already chosen not to hurt him. That mattered. The shadow grew larger, filling the curve of the wall near the hidden passage. Snow slid off something heavy just outside the fire's reach, melting as it touched the warmer air. The scent of wet earth and pine filled the shelter, sharp and alive. Daniel stayed still. The shadow paused. Then, slowly, it withdrew just enough for air to rush back down the chimney. The fire flared, bright again, and with it came warmth, clarity. The shadow remained at the edge of the light, not crossing into it, not retreating fully either. A boundary. Neutral ground. Daniel lowered his hand from the spray. His heart still raced, but beneath it was something else now. Recognition. Not of shape or species or myth. Of behavior. Whoever shared this shelter understood restraint, understood balance, understood that survival didn't require dominance. The fire settled again, crackling softly. Outside, the storm raged on. Indifferent to the fragile agreement holding beneath the mountain, Daniel sat back against the wall, eyes fixed on the place where light met dark. He didn't speak. Words felt unnecessary. In the glow of the fire, he was no longer just a ranger or a man built from rules. He was a witness, allowed here by something that didn't need his belief. The shadow remained, unmoving, patient, and as the hours crept by, as the storm spent itself above, Daniel felt a truth settle into him with quiet weight. This place did not belong to him. It never had. It belonged to the mountain. And tonight, the mountain had decided to share it. The silence wasn't still anymore. It pulsed. It had weight. Daniel Whitmore opened his eyes to firelight flickering lower than it had hours before. The logs burned down to a soft bed of coals, orange-red and breathing like something alive. But it wasn't the cold that had stirred him. It wasn't even fear. It was presence. His right hand moved slowly toward the bear spray hooked to his belt. The room hadn't changed, but the air inside it had. Slightly warmer, slightly heavier, like another breath had joined his own. Not loud, not close, just there. He stayed sitting, didn't rise, didn't speak. The shape took form at the edge of vision, not crashing through the hatch, not crawling through the passage behind the stones, but already here. Standing just within the curve of the back wall, where shadow and light met, but didn't fight. Tall, taller than the ceiling allowed, so it bent. Shoulders hunched slightly, not to threaten but to fit. Steam lifted off its back in faint ribbons, snowmelt clinging to the coarse dark fur that shimmered wet near the tips. It moved with the deliberate quiet of something used to not being seen. Not a beast, not a monster, an elder. It took a single step forward, and Daniel's fingers flexed tighter around the canister, thumb brushing the trigger, but he didn't raise it. Something deeper than training told him not to. The figure stopped, lowered its arms, not in surrender but in understanding. Then, with surprising care, it crouched by the edge of the fire and reached out. Not toward Daniel, toward the coals. Its hand was massive, wider than a man's chest, covered in hair but not thick enough to hide the structure beneath. Fingers, nails. A calloused palm darkened by time and cold. It took one of the smaller split logs Daniel had set aside and gently placed it into the center of the fire ring like someone trained to mind heat. The wood caught almost immediately, flames curling up like it had been waiting. Then it withdrew. Didn't leave. Didn't threaten. It backed away to the far curve of the shelter, lowered itself into a crouch again. Not sitting, not standing. Something in between. Elbows on knees, shoulders drawn forward. Not prey, not predator, a watcher. Daniel's breath trembled once in his chest before he mastered it. Still not a word between them, still no name, but something old passed across the space between fire and shadow. Not a request, not even a truce, a law, and Daniel knew it, even if he didn't remember learning it. He let go of the spray, reached instead for the same thermos of half-cold coffee, took a sip, then another, and set it back down with slow, even movements. The creature didn't flinch, didn't shift, just watched. The eyes, that's what Daniel finally let himself see. Not red, not black, not the kind of eyes people like to imagine in legends and horror shows. Amber, deep set, calm. The way old trees would look at you if they could. Not searching for weakness, just acknowledging form. Minutes passed, maybe longer. The fire snapped once and threw sparks. The elder didn't move. Then the ground murmured. A low tremble, more like a memory of movement than the real thing. Daniel felt it in his boots before he heard it. A dull pulse that came and went. The creature placed one hand palm down against the floor, head tilting, ear angled toward the earth as if listening to something Daniel couldn't hear. After a moment, it shifted its weight, leaned toward the wall, and placed itself between the fire and the far corner of the shelter. Its body moved in slow increments, adjusting, guarding. Then the sound came, a thunderous thump, distant but massive. As if part of the mountain had sighed, a heavy slab of snow or ice had let go, rushing down rock in a long, low avalanche. It never touched them, but it passed close, very close. Daniel didn't know whether to be afraid or grateful. He just watched as the elder slowly eased back into its crouch, head forward, shoulders relaxed again, as if the danger had passed, as if it had been expected. The firelight caught in the sheen of its brow now, and Daniel saw the full outline of its face. Not simian, not ape, not something from a zoo or fossil. No snout, no muzzle, just a broad, worn face with deep ridges above the eyes, a flattened nose, a wide mouth relaxed into something almost reserved, more human than not. But aged by wilderness, smoothed by time, it had lines, it had stories, and it had restraint. Daniel shifted slightly, feeling his back ache. His voice, unused for too long in the cold, came low and uncertain. "My dad," he said. The elder opened its eyes a little wider, not in surprise, in attention. Daniel swallowed. "My dad died up here, long time ago. Rescue call, kid stranded, blizzard. He went in, never came back out." The elder did not react like a man would. No nod, no sympathy, but something in its posture adjusted. The chest rose slower. The shoulders settled. It heard the pain without trying to solve it, and that was the first time in decades Daniel felt like someone understood the part he never said out loud. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The fire burned low again. The elder stood. Not suddenly, not with force. It moved to the hearth once more, picked up a piece of wood Daniel hadn't noticed, placed it onto the flames. It didn't need this place. That became clear now. It was keeping it alive, not using it, maintaining it, for others, for those who needed it. Daniel looked down at the fire, then back to the spot where the elder had crouched. Empty now. He hadn't heard it leave, but it had. Gone through the passage behind the stone, the way it had come, leaving behind no words, no proof, no damage, just the warmth of fire, tended. And Daniel sat there, shoulders hunched, knees drawn up, eyes wet in a way he didn't want to explain. Not fear, not wonder, just recognition. He was not the first to be saved here. And maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be the last. Outside, the storm howled still. But it felt smaller now, like a tantrum thrown beyond the edge of a sanctuary that had its own rules. Rules that didn't come from men or books or chain of command. The kind that held across centuries because they had never been broken. Daniel whispered something, not sure why. "Thank you," the flames answered, but the shelter remained still. Somewhere above, the snow kept falling. But below the world, in the bones of the mountain, a man and a legend had shared a room without needing to explain why. And that was enough. The second morning didn't start like a morning at all. There was no sunrise, no soft glow creeping in through cracks, no bird song to remind him he was still part of the world above. There was only the same low thrum of wind pressing at the stone and earth above him, and the sound of slow breath, not his own, measured, quiet, impossibly steady. Daniel Whitmore didn't move at first. The fire had burned low again, but not out. Someone had kept it going through the night, or something. The edges of the coals pulsed like eyes behind a half-lidded stare. He sat up, joints aching in a way that didn't feel urgent, just expected, like his body finally knew it wasn't in charge anymore. Across the space, the elder was still there. Same position, crouched low, hands on knees, watching without watching, not threatening, not curious, just present. Daniel reached for his pack, opened it slow. No sudden moves, Not because he feared what would happen, but because it felt wrong to interrupt the silence with anything less than respect. He pulled out a vacuum-sealed pouch, tore it open. Dried venison jerky, cracked granola, a cold biscuit that tasted like cardboard. He chewed in the quiet, then split what he had, and placed half the jerky closer to the fire, near the same spot where the elder had once placed wood. The elder didn't touch it. Not yet. Daniel wiped his fingers on a cloth square and settled in, back against the wall. Eyes still heavy, but mind clear in a way he hadn't felt in years. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then something shifted, a low sound, deep, resonant, not vocal but physical, rumbled from the creature's chest. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't speech, it was rhythm, like a drum played somewhere far beneath the earth. 3 beats, slow, even. Daniel closed his eyes, not in fear. He remembered something. His father's voice, buried under decades of silence. If you ever find yourself beneath the world, listen to what doesn't use words. He opened his eyes and nodded once. The elder shifted then, one massive arm reaching slowly into the narrow shadow behind its crouch. From the darkness, it pulled something metallic, small, dirty, rusted around the edges, and placed it gently near the fire. It was a piece of old aluminum, bent, weather-beaten. Daniel leaned forward, fingers brushing off soot, and saw it. Faint, barely legible, but there. The corner of a military-style dog tag, worn smooth but not erased. 3 letters remained. Wah! His stomach clenched. He knew what the last letters were supposed to be. Whitmore, his father. He hadn't worn tags. Not formally. Not since the 60s. But Daniel remembered vaguely a story his mother once told. How he had kept a battered ID tag from a man he saved in a rescue back in '62. Said he wore it tucked in his jacket pocket. Said it reminded him not every call ended with a body bag. Daniel stared at the tag like it had teeth. The elder didn't watch him directly. It stared into the coals, head tilted forward, fingers drumming slowly against its own thigh. 3 taps, then stillness. Daniel didn't speak, couldn't. Not with the way his throat had closed around something sharp and cold. He picked up the tag and folded it into the cloth with a reverence he hadn't felt since the day they scattered his father's ashes. He looked back up. The elder was holding something else now, a walking stick, old, worn smooth with age. Not a branch, not a broken limb, but shaped, carved by hand. The handle bent slightly forward, the shaft thick and dark. It extended it toward Daniel, not as a gift, not as an offering, but as something remembered. Daniel reached out slowly, his fingers wrapped around the handle. 3 indentations along the grip, shallow, perfectly placed for the shape of a human hand. He blinked. His father's field journal, the one he wasn't supposed to find until years after the accident, had a line scrawled in the margin of a maintenance log. A throwaway note, barely legible. 3 holds saved my wrist, made the descent possible. Daniel held the stick tighter. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. You knew him. It wasn't a question. The elder didn't move. But something in the room, if you could call this place a room, changed again. Not the temperature, not the air, the weight, the meaning. Daniel's breath trembled. He leaned back, cane still in his grip, and stared at the fire like it might answer him. I grew up hating the snow, he said. After he died, I blamed the mountain. Took me years to understand it wasn't personal, wasn't cruelty, just the price. The elder didn't answer, but its head tilted. Daniel nodded. He didn't expect understanding, but he knew it was there. I spent my whole damn life trying to live by rules, control the wild, predict storms, make sense of something that doesn't owe us sense. And then, this. He looked at the fire again. Maybe it's not about controlling it. Maybe it's about surviving it, learning how to be small without being weak. The creature's breathing slowed. Then that same deep vibration again, low. 3 pulses, as if echoing what had been spoken. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the silence that followed didn't scare him. It comforted him. It told him he wasn't alone in what he carried. He wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket, then drew his knees up and rested the cane across them. His hand lingered on the 3 marks in the wood. Outside, the storm shifted, no longer clawing at the earth above, just whispering. Worn down, almost tired. The blizzard's fury spent, but not gone. He stood slowly, tested the cane under his weight. Sturdy, balanced. It felt like something passed on, not discarded. He looked back at the fire. The jerky he'd placed earlier was gone now. Not devoured, not scattered, just gone. A shared meal, without rules, without ceremony. Daniel reached into his pack and pulled out a folded square of heavy paper. On it, he wrote with hands that still trembled slightly, "If this place finds you, leave it better, and never take the last of the wood." He left the message near the hearth, under a clean rock, and placed a full pack of matches beside it. Then he looked toward the passage. Dark, narrow, silent, but not alone. He didn't say goodbye, just turned once more toward the fire as if to remember the shape of it, and stepped back into his crouch, and waited. Not for permission, but for the right moment. The elder stood without sound, moved toward the back wall, paused, then disappeared into the same stone-dark narrow that had brought it here, leaving behind the scent of pine, earth, and something older than both. And Daniel sat in that space a few minutes longer, one hand resting on the cane, the other pressed flat against the floor, listening, not for answers, just for the rhythm. 3 slow beats in his chest, and the long, quiet hush of something watching over him that did not need to be seen to be remembered. The storm didn't stop all at once. It faded, like breath running out, like an old man slipping into sleep after sitting too long by the fire. Daniel Whitmore knew that kind of ending, the kind that didn't announce itself, didn't flash or scream, just withdrew. When he opened his eyes, the fire had died down to soft curls of smoke. The warmth lingered, but it was faint, like a memory in the walls more than heat in the air. He stretched, slow, testing his legs. His back ached from the floor, and the stiffness had sunk deep into his ribs, but he was alive, still in the shelter, still below the world. The passage where the elder had disappeared was dark again, untouched. He stood with care, adjusted the strap of his pack, gripped the cane that had become something more than a tool, and gave the fire one last look. Then he turned to the wall, reached down, and with calloused fingers, folded his note deeper into the crack beside the hearth. The climb back to the surface took longer than expected. The hidden tunnel behind the stone was tight, twisted. At points, he had to crawl. At others, just breathe and trust that the cold air meant a way through. When he finally pushed the hatch open, sunlight struck his face with a sharpness that made him flinch. It wasn't bright, not really. But after days in the earth, even a soft gray sky over the Cabinet Mountains looked like a revelation. The snow was deep, 4 feet, maybe more. Drifts stacked high against broken trees. Branches snapped like kindling. The forest was no longer quiet. It moaned, shifted, cracked with the weight of everything that had just passed through it. Daniel had to brace himself with each step, leaning into the cane as though it had always belonged in his hand. He didn't look back. Not yet. It took 6 hours to make it down. He walked mostly alone. Only the sounds of shifting snow and the occasional creak of ice overhead kept him company. No tracks, no birds, no evidence of anything but survival. By the time he reached the lower trail, his knees burned and his breath came in short bursts. But he knew this stretch. His boots remembered it. His body could walk it blind. The ranger station was already in sight when he heard the voices. Not from inside, from the lot. When he rounded the final bend, they were there. People. Too many. One truck had sheriff markings. Another carried the Forest Service logo. Then came the civilian vehicles. He counted 4, and the snowmobiles. Lined up, engines still steaming from recent use. Someone had been looking for him. Someone had started to mourn. The crowd turned as he stepped through the trees, and for a moment, no one moved. Luke was the first. He rushed forward, slipping on ice, boots skidding until he reached Daniel and threw his arms around him in a sudden panicked grip. "You're—" Luke's voice cracked. We thought you were—" Daniel nodded, just once. Behind Luke, Ranger Myers stood stiff and pale, radio in one hand. "We called off the search this morning. Thought maybe we were late." "You were early," Daniel said, voice hoarse. Someone handed him water. Someone else called out for medical. The noise returned quickly. Too quickly. People asking questions. People snapping pictures. A man from the sheriff's department asked what he'd eaten, where he'd slept, how far he'd made it before the storm hit. Daniel gave them the answers he needed too. "Found cover," he said. "An old shelter," he added. "Probably been there for decades." He didn't say who'd kept the fire going. He didn't say what had watched him through the cold. But then Wade Haskins stepped out from the back of a snowmobile, hat pulled low, jacket dusty with trail mud. He wore that look Daniel had come to know too well. A man trying to pretend curiosity while sniffing out something bigger. Wade walked up slow, like they were the only two people left standing in the whole forest. "So you made it," he said. Daniel didn't answer. Wade smiled. "Bet you saw things up there," he said. "Hard not to when you get turned around. Hunger makes the mind do wild things." Daniel didn't blink. Wade leaned closer, dropped his voice. "Any prints? Big ones?" Daniel looked him straight in the eye. "Only mine." Wade held his smile for a second longer, then gave a slow nod and stepped back into the crowd. Later, after the medics cleared him, after Luke brought him a clean flannel and the station settled into something almost like calm, Daniel stood by the window and stared up at the ridgeline. The mountain hadn't changed. It never did. But now he saw something different in the angles, in the shadows, a silence that wasn't emptiness, a watching that didn't need eyes. That night he didn't go home. He sat by the wood stove in the station's side room, cane across his lap, fingers tracing the worn grooves again and again. The dog tag was in his chest pocket, wrapped in cloth. He didn't unfold it. Didn't need to. Around midnight someone knocked. Not the front door. The back. The one only Rangers used. No badge, no clipboard. Daniel opened it slowly. Martha Bell stood there in her long green coat, snow dusted across her shoulders like she'd walked through time instead of down Main Street. She didn't speak. She just handed him a small tin and stepped inside. Inside was stew. Still warm. He sat. She poured coffee. No questions. Only silence. She finally spoke after the first sip. "Heard Wade's been talking." Daniel nodded. "He always talks. Folks are listening now." He didn't argue. "He's planning a trip," she said. "Not a hike, a search." "I know." "You gonna stop him?" Daniel took another sip. The coffee bit, black and bitter. "No," he said. "But I won't help him find the wrong things." Martha watched him for a long while, then reached into her coat and placed something on the table. A piece of pine bark, rough, scratched with marks, 3 vertical lines, almost worn away. He stared. "Found this in a cedar grove years ago," she said. "Didn't tell anyone. Figured it wasn't meant for us." Daniel picked it up. The grooves were deep, familiar. She nodded once. Then she stood, pulled her coat tight, and walked back into the night. He watched her go, then turned the bark over in his hand again and again and again, as if waiting for it to speak. The cane leaned against the wall. The fire crackled. Outside, somewhere deep in the trees, a branch snapped. Not wind, not accident, measured. And Daniel felt it again, that same presence, not near, not far, just steady, watching, waiting, not to be seen, only to be left alone. He stood by the window until the dark folded back over the treetops, until the snow began falling again, soft and soundless, like someone tucking in the earth. Then he whispered into the silence, "I won't tell them," and something just beyond hearing whispered back. Not words, just trust. And it was enough. Spring didn't arrive in the Cabinet Mountains like a celebration. It came quiet, like a returning thought. Snow melted in slow streaks down the rock's face. The creek behind the ranger station groaned, then ran again. Pine needles turned slick. Mud returned to the trail. Daniel Whitmore waited until the thaw had settled before he went back. He didn't tell anyone. Didn't put it on the log. Just left early one morning while the others were still sipping coffee and talking about fish counts and tree fall. The cane tapped steady against the path. His pack was lighter this time, but what it carried meant more. Dried food, matches, a sealed tin of kindling, one new flannel shirt, one small blanket, a notebook. No GPS, no radio, just a man in the trail that knew him. He moved slow, not because of age, but because of weight, of memory, of silence, of something sacred. The trees didn't greet him. They didn't need to. They simply made room, like they'd been expecting him. By midday, he reached the shelf trail just below Mule Ridge, where the blizzard had turned him sideways and swallowed the world whole. Now sun filtered through the pines in slanted bars, and the air was sweet with thawing sap. No voices, no dogs, no red markers, no Wade. He was alone again. The entrance to the shelter had shifted. Subtle, just enough for someone who knew what to look for. Snowmelt had slid down into the seams, packed mud covering the hatch edges. But it was still there, waiting under the quiet. Daniel knelt, cleared it with bare hands, lifted the hatch. A small rush of cool, earthen air greeted him. And something else too. Not scent, memory. He climbed down slowly. The inside hadn't changed. Walls still curved. Clay still held the quiet. The hearth was empty but clean. No soot spilled, no charred leftovers. Someone had taken care to sweep, to press down the ash, to erase their presence without disrespecting it. He unpacked, laid the fire gently. New pine split with care. The tin of kindling arranged beneath, with dry twigs stacked like a crown. He struck the match and watched it catch. The smoke curled sharp, then warm. The flame danced low, then rose. Then he reached into the pack and took out the notebook. It was leather-bound, simple, the kind used by fire rangers for field notes and patrol logs. On the first page, in his own hand, he wrote, "This shelter is for any who need it. If you enter, tend the fire. Leave what you can. Take only what's necessary. If you survive, let the next one survive too." He signed only with initials, DW, then turned to the next page. "If you make it through a storm and find this, write your name, write your date. Let someone know you were here, that you mattered." He left the book inside a hollowed-out cedar box near the wall. Placed beside it a pencil, a half-bar of soap, a rag for drying hands. None of it extravagant. All of it chosen. He sat, watched the fire. No footsteps came from the tunnel. No shift in air. But that didn't matter. He knew the elder had been here. Knew it the way a man knows when a tree still has roots beneath the frost. Not because he saw, but because he felt the care in how the shelter had been left. A shared place. Without ownership, without demand. He spent the night inside, not hiding, just staying, listening. In the early morning, before the sun touched the tree line, he took a thin strip of cedar bark, carved from the edge of the firewood, and used the blade of his pocket knife to etch a line. Then another, then one more. 3 clean marks. He didn't place them high, just eye level, on the inner beam near the door. A quiet acknowledgement. Nothing bold, nothing loud, just seen. When he left the shelter that morning, it wasn't with any sadness. He didn't look back. The fire would die on its own. Or maybe someone else would find it and let it live. Weeks passed, then months. He returned once in early summer, and found something new. The notebook had been moved. Not far, just repositioned in a way that only someone paying attention would notice. A smudge of ash on the corner that hadn't been there before. On the inside cover, beneath his original message, a mark had been added. Not letters, not a language, just 5 strokes, even, intentional, like the echo of his own, but older. He touched the mark and didn't try to decipher it. Some things weren't meant to be read, only received. The air inside the shelter still held that faint sense of breath. of life come and gone, of memory made room for. He didn't stay long that day, just left another bundle of dry wood, replaced the matches, added a tin of tea, and walked back down with a quietness in him that didn't feel heavy anymore. The town of Libby drifted into summer without incident. Wade Haskins launched his expedition, took 3 men, 2 trail cams, and a local guide. They came back with frostbite, cracked gear, and no stories worth repeating. He never mentioned the shelter. Neither did Daniel. Martha saw him one afternoon, sitting on the diner porch, eyes turned to the ridge. She brought him peach pie and said nothing. Some silences are too sacred for filling. At the ranger station, Luke asked once, just once, "You ever go back up there?" Daniel gave a small smile. "Often enough." Luke hesitated, then nodded, accepting the answer for what it was. Not truth, not lie, just enough. In the fall, when the first leaves curled gold and the wind began changing its pitch again, Daniel walked to the tree line behind the cabin, the same place his father once stood before vanishing into storm. He rested both hands on the cane, fingers tight on the worn grip, and said it, not to the trees, not to the wind, just out loud, "I'll keep the fire." He closed his eyes, and somewhere far up the ridge, beyond snow and shadow, a low sound moved through the forest. Not words, but not weather either, just the world remembering him. Not as a ranger, not as a witness, but as a man who didn't betray what had once saved him. He turned back, one last time, and walked slow down the path, boots pressing into the soft dirt, autumn moving in around him. No applause, no resolution, just the quiet knowledge that somewhere in the mountain, the fire was still burning, and someone was watching it. There are stories we tell to make sense of the world, and then there are the ones that find us when we're finally quiet enough to listen. This was one of those stories. Not loud, not grand, but carved into the stillness like wind-shaped rock, passed between generations not through words, but through acts of quiet mercy. Somewhere between the storms we survive and the silences we carry, something ancient still waits for us. Not to explain itself, but to remind us who we are when no one's watching. In the wild, where no road signs point the way, and no trail cameras can define the truth, there are laws not written by men. Laws shaped by need, by reverence, by the fragile understanding that not everything must be conquered to be real. There are places not meant to be discovered, only remembered. Spaces held in trust, passed down not through ownership, but through kindness. The kind that leaves wood for the next traveler. The kind that tends a fire for a stranger they'll never meet. The kind that says, "You matter, even if I never know your name." And maybe that's the truest legacy of all, the fire we keep for others. Not every truth needs to be proven. Not every mystery needs solving. Sometimes the deepest meaning lies not in uncovering what hides in the trees, but in how we choose to walk among them. With respect, with humility, with the quiet strength to protect what cannot ask for protection. Because at the heart of every storm, there's always a choice. To turn away or to build something that shelters life, not just our own. So if you've ever wondered whether kindness matters, even when no one sees, even when it's never returned, remember this: the fire still burns, not because someone claimed it, but because someone chose to keep it alive. Thank you for walking this journey with us. If this story spoke to something quiet in you, something maybe long buried or half forgotten, we'd love to hear what it stirred. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections matter more than you know. And if you'd like to walk with us again, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. The forest has more stories to tell. We'll be waiting when you're ready to hear them.